Well, when we had young kids, we told them, don't have a DRA. Well, today's question is this: do you have a PSR? Today on Finding Traction, we talk about what that is and why you don't want it. Welcome aboard. Well, last week I introduced a new set of recovery books that I have been reading, and those books are entitled The Sexually Healthy Man and The Psychology of Porn by author Andrew Bowman. He's a fellow journeyer through porn. He's a therapist that lives and works out of the Seattle area. And I really found these books intense. They're out of the box, and they're incredibly thought-provoking. Again, I'm working to get him on the podcast. But in the meantime, I want to just share with you a few ways that they've impacted me and how they've kind of lodged in my brain. Well, I don't know if it's Andrew who came up with this term PSR. It's the first time I've heard it described this way. And, as kids, or when we had kids, we used to tell our kids, don't have DRAs. A DRA was what? It was a dirty, rotten attitude. And it seemed to come so naturally to our kids, maybe because we as parents, their parents modeled it so effectively. I don't know. But what is a PSR, and why don't you want it? Well, a PSR is a pornographic style of relating. And this is a style of relating when you have learned from porn, and porn has been your primary teacher and guide in your sexual development. The truth is we've all learned ways of being, and then when we actually just live those out in our relationships with other people. Now, I don't want to sound too paternalistic here. It affects all of us at all ages if we've been involved in porn for any long period of time. But I think this is being most acutely experienced right now by the younger generation. Those people who are called digital natives, who grew up from their earliest memory of being online. And here's the bottom line. The younger generation, especially when they've been looking at porn, have been raised and mentored by repeated exposure to internet porn. So think about it. You have an entire generation of younger people who've, again, essentially been raised by porn, and porn has been their sexuality and their relationship tutor. Now they find themselves attempting to enter into real and committed relationships. And as they try to navigate their way into these new healthy relationships, they realize this is incredibly difficult. I am not prepared for this. In fact, I've learned some things that are a real handicap. Well, a pornographic style of relating is a real handicap that needs to be overcome. Now, I'm going to throw some symptoms at you. Some of them, they may stick to your wall and you go, oh, that's me. That resembles me. I resemble that comment. Others go, well, maybe somewhat, but not completely. And then there may be, I think at the 7 or 8 we're going to do, some you may say, I don't think that is really my issue or the way that affects me. But I think by the end of this, as I go through these different symptoms, you may realize, you know what? I have been intensely studying in the classroom of porn, and it has seriously affected me and my relationships, and not in a good way. So, in the spirit of learning, let's forge on. I'm going to take some of Andrew Bowman's insights. I'm going to kind of riff on them, repackage them in a way that makes sense to me. Andrew, if you ever end up listening to this, the smart stuff is probably yours. The rest of it's me. Come on my show and you can correct me from all of the things I've said wrong. So here we go. Here's 7 or 8 examples of a pornographic style of relating. Number 1, we have learned to treat women as objects. You've probably heard this term objectifying a lot. And what does it actually mean? Well, Bowman talks about it in terms of having a difficulty in relating to women as individual human beings. Pamela Paul, who was a porn researcher, she has a great book called Pornified. And this is what she said from all her interviews with men who had been heavily involved in porn. She said this: they have lost the ability to relate to or be close to women. She says, she basically says, they can't be close, they can't relate to women, real women. And then she goes on to describe how our interactions with girls on the screen has effectively pornified our relationships with all women. You say pornified. What do you mean by that? Well, think of it. If you have been looking at porn for years, you looked at literally thousands upon thousands of images and videos of naked bodies. These images become seared into our brain, and they've developed in us a finely tuned arousal template. We now, basically take women and divide them into body parts: breasts, butts, hair, shapes, the things that we look for, that we like. Click, click, no, click, 2, click, 5, click, 6, click, 1, click, 9. Wow. We do that over and over and over again. It's a little bit like frat boys that used to, reminded me of when we built the early Facebook days, where frat boys were simply giving a woman a number based on how hot they were. You see, eventually a woman just becomes a pleasing or displeasing collection of body parts. Now, I know that sounds really harsh. You say, well, how does that actually affect my relationships? Well, one is it causes us to constantly be panning and scanning women, and even panning and scanning in our relationships. People can really start dealing with relationships just like the click, click, click. They're looking for perfection. They're looking for that arousal template, and they just don't find it, so they keep clicking. It's not much different to the old dating, not the old dating apps where you're constantly swiping and swiping and swiping. It's a similar dynamic here. I've met men over the years that never can find a suitable woman. Well, what does that mean? Well, a woman that can keep me aroused. Well, here's the problem. What if your arousal is based on novelty? Of course, you're never going to be able to last or sustain a long-term monogamous relationship because it's only a single person. So this whole objectifying is a real issue, and it just makes us have a click, click, click approach to relationships. Panning and scanning, objectifying body parts. So that's the first one. Here's the second one. We develop an anger and resentment towards women. You go, whoa, hold on. No, that's not me. I love women. I love everything about women, you might say. Well, Bowman would actually say that's actually not true. Over time, you will actually develop a love-hate relationship with women. Sure, you're attracted to women in the image of the feminine, but women now have become part of your shame. I hate my shame, therefore, I hate women. You see, you might be thinking, if it wasn't for women, I wouldn't be tempted. Why are they always trying to tempt me? Look at the way they dress. Why do they dress that way? They're intentionally causing me to stumble. Maybe they should just all wear a burqa. We can't do that, can we? Boy, that sure would be nice. They should be covered. They should be put away. We should be separate from them. It's interesting, over the years, I have been surprised at the ill will I've heard expressed against women. Men holding women responsible for tempting them. That's not surprising. We move to the next part of a PSR. We develop a mistrust around women and resort to avoidance mechanisms. Well, why don't we trust women? Well, really the answer is because we don't trust ourselves. As a result, we avoid women, especially any woman that we find even the faintest bit attractive. If there's somebody beautiful, we'll avoid them like a plague. See, it's interesting. There was a group of holy men in Jesus' day, religious holy men. They were called Pharisees. But there was another slang term for them. They were called bleeding Pharisees. You go, what was that about? Well, here was the idea. These holy men could not look upon a woman lest they be tempted. So they would always be looking down and, as a result, walking into brick buildings and causing all sorts of bodily damage. And it was like a sort of pride for them. Women don't tempt me. I will never catch the eye, look at a woman in the eye or look upon them. This whole idea. And all of this sort of religious piety was done in the idea of not being tempted by looking at a woman. You can see why it can be so hard for women, for example, in the workplace. Half the men are hitting on them, and the other half of the men are treating them as toxic and someone to be avoided. What has become known as the Billy Graham rule, or more recently the Mike Pence rule, of not being alone with a woman. Yeah, I guess that has a certain wisdom to it to some degree, but you can see how quickly this becomes unhelpful when it's rooted in fear and mistrust rather than some noble desire to create a protective, caring environment. So number 3 is we mistrust women. Number 4, we look for unequal relationships. Pornographic style of relationships are all unequal. These are relationships, because we've learned them in porn, where we can be in control, where we can be dominant, and where women exist to serve us. We value women often who are subordinate and submissive. In order for me to feel better, they must step behind me. Some of this is couched in religious or paternalistic language. They must come under my covering. I'm the head of the house, the priest in the family. I will assert my dominance, and strong, gifted women are a threat to our masculinity. There's a quote in Andrew Bowman's book where this pastor says to Andrew, don't you want someone who's more of a helpmate to you, who can support you in your ministry? And Andrew mused, I might have his words wrong, but it's like, why do they need to be less so I can be more? Why do they need to be smaller so I can be bigger? See, the real issue here is the issue of control. And we've learned in the school of porn, in relationships that are non-mutual. And all we've done is develop non-mutual relationships that we can control with videos or images rather than a real person. So that creates just an innate selfishness and an unconscious desire for absolute control over our intimate relationships. Now, number 5, we confuse intensity for relational substance. One of the guys in my group talks about this thing he calls the spike of porn. And it's as opposed to the real life, slow upward trajectory of, just life. Life doesn't come in these intense spikes that porn gives, for example. Porn, of course, leads us to an intense experience that usually ends in orgasm. And then it also comes with its own intense feelings, negative feelings on the back end, of course. But real life and real sex doesn't fit that bill. In one sense, this carefully calibrated intensity that porn gives us is better than real sex with a real person. And it sets us up for dissatisfaction when we actually have to develop sexual intimacy with a real person. Let me say it a different way. My wife, when we met, she had a real dysfunctional relationship with a previous boyfriend. And it was a roller coaster relationship, ups and downs and heartbreak and this up and down type of relationship. And then she met me and she was thinking, is this love? doesn't have the highs and the incredible lows, that I associate with love. It's just kind of a slow, steady build. Now, I would say the similar thing is with pornography. Is this what sexual intimacy is? Well, pornography teaches us an entirely different version of what that looks like and feels like, and it's not helpful for real life and real relationships. See, this is the way that Andrew Bowman puts it when he talks about an emotionally healthy style of relating. He says it's built on a strong foundation of balanced intimacy, growth, tears, laughter, pain, and shared joy. Once again, the spike of porn is opposite to the long-term sustaining ability that real intimacy brings us in relationships. See, one way that we try to keep this spike going is in the next part of the PSR, which is fantasy. You see, fantasy is an escape from what is real, whether it's difficult emotions such as stress, anxiety, depression, or just the pain that genuine relationships actually bring us. I mean, there's pleasure, but there's also real aspects of hard work and pain that come in every relationship. You see, fantasy removes those struggles. While healthy relationships live in the truth, pornography helps us bolster a life of fantasy that is difficult to undo. Why? Because we're constantly living out of what life could be like, what we wish our life could, or what we wish our life actually would, better resemble our life going forward, rather than what we're actually experiencing in our real, down-to-earth life. You never learn, if you live in fantasy, in this fantasy world, you never learn to be comfortable in your own skin and your own world. You never learn to relate to a real human being across from you. People who live in fantasy always have this vague sense of dissatisfaction that you're missing out. Why? Because your life falls so short of what you fantasize it could be like. Got two more. Number 7, we find true intimacy with a woman threatening. Sometimes I talk with men, for example, who only had sisters, or they only had male friends growing up and never had female friends. And they've confessed sometimes that they felt like they were at a disadvantage to understanding women because, for example, never had sisters. They never learned to anticipate her needs and connect with a woman emotionally. So think about it in the same way. You've spent years upon years connecting sexually to virtual women with absolutely no emotional connection. I mean, they never asked for it. All they wanted to be was your sex buddy, right? And so you never developed any of those skills. So you've learned to become sexually intimate without being emotionally present. Now you're in a real relationship, or you're trying to build a new relationship, and you're finding that your sexuality does not draw you closer together. It's just the way that you get off. But there's really no intimacy that comes from it because you learn to separate out emotional intimacy from sexual intimacy. Maybe that's why the next one is so appealing, the next aspect of PSR, which is isolation. People trained by porn have learned to express their sexuality in isolation, behind closed doors, right? Let me quote Bowman again. We come to see and protect this isolation as some type of sacred space. Even the thought of inviting another human being feels threatening and disruptive. The isolation fuels the secret life and separates us from the loving relationships we most need. Well, the whole idea of sexuality and building a healthy relationship, of course, is based on communion. Vulnerably allowing yourself and allowing another person to come into the most guarded part of your life, which is your sexuality. Opening your heart to another is an invitation to the real you. And that may be something that you fear. But that's something that you need to learn, to be known and to fully know. That's why it's pretty common for partners of sex addicts to feel at times that they're living with a stranger. And the times they have in bed sexually don't actually make them feel closer to their partner. Well, I think at this point I'm gonna end. I've probably done a disservice again to some of Bowman's points by mixing them with my own. If you want to get the unadulterated version, you can check out his books. Once again, let me say this. Some of those examples of a pornographic style of relating, they may closely resemble you. Go, oh man, you're reading my mail. Others of them, you might go, well, parts of them, do represent me. And then maybe there's some that you go, I think I'm good in that particular area. So what do you do if you realize, oh my goodness, I need to totally change my style of relating? Well, the very first thing you need to do is you need to fire your old mentor, your old trainer, your old coach. For example, if you were a high school coach, let's say a football coach, and you had all these great players with all this great potential, and you could never win a game, at some point the parents or the school might say, you obviously aren't bringing out the best in these students. We need to find another coach, another mentor. Well, porn has not brought out the best in your sexuality and the best in your relationships. It's time to find a new trainer. And sometimes that's getting close to other people and learning, observing other people's relationships. Let me just say this. Each of those PSR examples have a healthy style of relating, that you can slowly begin to learn as you walk away from what is a dysfunctional style into a healthy one. Let me just walk through those 8 real quickly and give you another example. Rather than objectifying, for example, we learn to honor women in our lives. 2, rather than living in anger and resentment, we understand that our own brokenness and denial has been projected onto women. And we learn, first of all, by dealing with our own issues. Number 3, rather than mistrusting women, we learn to trust ourselves around them. 4, rather than looking for unequal relationships, we learn to develop equal relationships based on respect, where we're not threatened by their gifts and abilities. 5, rather than checking or chasing intensity, we learn to enjoy the simple and substantive gifts that God gives us every day, including sex. 6, rather than living in a fantasy world, we learn to accept and enjoy the real nature of our present situation from a place of contentment. 7, rather than finding true intimacy threatening, we take steps to know and be fully known in community. And 8, rather than being locked in isolation, we develop true community in relationships of giving and receiving. Now, for some of you, you go, man, that is a tall order. Well, life is a series of baby steps. How many years did it take you to fully develop a pornographic style of relating? If you say, well, I've been working on this for 5, 10, 15 years, well, it's going to take more than a few days for you to develop a more healthy style of relating. Next podcast, I want to kind of go back to this idea of honor and objectification, because he said something I'm still wrestling with around the area of beauty. I want to get to that next time, but that's a whole topic in itself. But until next time, enjoy walking out a new style of relating. to the people in your life and the women in your life, one baby step at a time. God bless you.